So if you're part of or interested in the climate conversation, you may have noticed that the reduction of methane emissions is getting a lot of attention because it's a greenhouse gas considered 27 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. Because of this, over 100 countries have committed to global pledges, and government regulations have been enacted to reduce methane emissions. Some regulation is specific to dairy farms, because cow manure is a large source of methane. But there's good news for dairy farms. In a recent study published by the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology, that methane emissions from composted manure can be reduced 79% by adding a simple and affordable carbon-negative material called biochar. In this video, we are going to briefly review the study, which was facilitated in the context of current California methane regulation and done at field scale on a working dairy farm. So it's important to know that in 2016, California enacted SB 1383, a law to reduce methane emissions from dairy farms 40% by 2030. California has chosen to meet this goal with the installation of what are called anaerobic digesters. It's a technology that can capture some of the methane from manure and convert it into biogas, energy, and electricity. But the challenge is that in addition to being expensive, this process only captures methane from the liquid portion of the manure. But methane is still released from large dry stockpiles that are left behind and separated. Compost is commonly added to reduce some of the methane from these large stockpiles, but it's not enough. The piles are still significant sources of methane emissions. So this is why researchers from the University of California, Merced set out to quantify the greenhouse gas effects of adding biochar to compost, because biochar is known for its ability to adsorb gases like methane and improve aeration, which is part of the process. And even though biochar is an agricultural technique that has been around for thousands of years, until now there had been no field-scale research on its ability to reduce methane from dairy manure. So after the researchers applied biochar to composting manure, they tracked it for 35 days, and the results showed that biochar reduced 79% more methane emissions when compared to composting alone. The research also studied the climate impact of 3 types of manure management: composting, biochar composting, and stockpiling only, which is basically leaving the manure alone. The results showed that biochar composting led to an added climate benefit and the highest net sink of emissions compared to just composting or stockpiling manure when they modeled both a 20-year and a 100-year life cycle assessment of each method. In the 100-year model, biochar composting was the largest source of a net sink of emissions and carbon sequestration, almost 3 times more effective than composting alone. So when you look at the graph on the left, you can see that the process of biochar production itself, noted in the black bar, is a significant source of carbon sequestration itself because it prevents biomass from emitting carbon either due to burning or decomposing, and then turns that biomass into a stable form of carbon that can then be stored in the ground. Some biochar production technologies can also use clean energy, which only contribute to more mitigation of emissions. So in the 20-year model, biochar composting was the only net sink of emissions, where composting and stockpiling were net sources of emissions. Now, this research is significant. It has the potential to flip the switch when discussing dairy farms. With a simple application of a lower cost and scalable carbon-negative material like biochar, this research shows that dairy farm manure could be a net sink instead of a net emitter of methane. Could we have our cheese and eat it too? Well, as mentioned, California has chosen anaerobic digesters to meet their goals. But the challenge with those is that they're very expensive, like we mentioned before. They can be millions of dollars. They are logistically challenging to engineer at times, and they can only be economically feasible on larger dairy farms. To meet its goal, California must install 725 digesters, but there are only 799 dairy farms that are even large enough to house them. This is an adoption rate of over 90%, which is challenging for any regulation, but especially given the cost and other barriers to entry, it doesn't seem super feasible. California has committed over $25 billion to the digester program alone. The research states that if biochar was used at scale with composting manure, California would need 132 less digesters to meet its goal and increase net methane mitigation by 29%. This could save California hundreds of millions of dollars related to installing digesters and help them more quickly reach their goals. Well, that's a recap of the study. I'll put a link to it below in the description and have a few comments and points of discussion. Number 1, this research could be helpful to other policymakers looking to reduce methane emissions in dairy farms but don't want to spend billions of dollars. Biochar application costs much less than anaerobic digesters. It's easier to facilitate. It's derived from a waste stream, so it opens the door to policymakers that are looking for an affordable, effective, and nature-based carbon-negative material to capture methane. This is especially important in Europe and developing countries, where many of the dairy farms are smaller than the large industrial ones in California. Thus, it may not be feasible or even economical for these smaller farms to house the digesters. 2. When looking at research with biochar, it's important to note that not all biochars are the same. Biochars have varying qualities based on the type of feedstock, the pyrolysis technology that was used, its carbon percentage, its percentage of ash, and so much more. The biochar used in this study was made from mostly woody type biomass. A max pyrolysis temp of 900 degrees Celsius, had around 95% carbon content and 4% ash. Biochar qualities and characteristics also relate to the desired goals and the context of application. You may need a certain type of biochar for soil regeneration, but a different type to reduce toxins or heavy metals in large bodies of water. So you really just got to look at the type of biochar and understand its context in the research. Number 3, there can be additional benefits when discussing biochar and compost. When biochar is mixed with compost, it can be a powerful soil amendment when used in the right manner. Research has shown that biochar can reduce irrigation needs, improve plant health, growth rate, bind heavy metals from the soil, increase soil organic carbon, and even restore degraded soil. Dairy farmers could use or sell the biochar compost to other farmers to reduce costs, improve revenue, and increase the longevity of their soil. Well, thanks for listening. I hope this brief summary helps shed light on and bring hope to the idea that yes, there is today an available and scalable carbon negative solution that helps solve challenges related to methane emissions on dairy farms. See you next time.